the years, one of the most challenging dynamics that comes up repeatedly in the playroom for a lot of play therapists is when the child starts to escalate. Either they're escalating or the play escalates. And it lands as challenging mostly because it feels scary. And oftentimes, the play therapist then has feelings of feeling like they're losing control, or they themselves feel out of control, or they're worried that something's going to get hurt, including them, or the child's going to get hurt. But it's actually a bit of a challenging and even complicated moment. And so the natural instinct and urge within the therapist is going to be to try to shut the escalation down, to try to calm the child down, if you will. But I want to give a little bit more insight into what's likely happening inside of the child that is creating this experience of escalation, because it can then offer us more creative solutions and more of an idea of how we might want to intervene that may be a little bit more therapeutic than just shutting the play down or shutting the child down out of a reaction because we're feeling scared or we're feeling overwhelmed or helpless. So, the very first thing and most important thing to understand is that if a child is in the process of escalating and they're escalating to the point where it's starting to become really intense, we can reframe this to the child is losing connection with themselves. So even just replacing that language. So the child isn't escalating, they're losing connection with themselves. And in this loss of connection, their behavior is starting to get larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. They're literally losing their ability to self-govern. They're losing their ability to contain, to be able to modulate the intensity that is happening inside of them. And as a result of them losing themselves or not being able to modulate, they really are looking for something or someone to create some kind of a sense of containment. Now, when I say containment, I don't mean like boundaries trying to control kind of containment. I'm actually talking about a felt sense of containment that also has safety attached to that. And that's a really interesting concept when we're talking about this. So, what does this practically look like or mean? Well, as the adult, as the child is escalating, if I am not connected to myself, if I'm having a hard time staying connected, the child is going to feel that. And you can think of it this way: they're not going to feel the safety within me, right? They're not going to feel the part of me inside that is steady, that they can anchor into so that they can begin to feel themselves again. Now, it's really important that we're not assuming that when I say this, I'm talking about the therapist being calm, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the therapist being able to be connected to themselves. You can still be overwhelmed, you can still be anxious, you can even be mad, but connected and it's that connected part that the child begins to orient towards, which allows them to start to orient inside. Now, that's one reason, is they literally can't feel the therapist. The other that can be also supporting the escalation, if you will, is that there can be what's called incongruence in the environment. So when things don't make sense, it can register inside of a child as something here doesn't feel safe, something feels off, something feels scary. So sometimes the child will escalate in order to try to get the environment to become congruent. So, two different ways that we can think about that. One is for the therapist to get congruent, right? For the therapist to stop trying to act like everything's okay or stop trying to act calm when they're really, really not calm, but for the therapist to be connected and real. Or something in the environment isn't being named, and that's also what's creating some of the escalation. So maybe a feeling's not being named, maybe it's something practical like the child doesn't know what's going to happen next, and that feels scary, and so that's not being named. But children will amp in order to try to draw in containment, through connection and congruency in the environment and also within the adult that they are interacting with. So that's a really important piece, is that when a child's escalating, it's not about making them stop. It's not about really anything other than how does the therapist connect to themselves so that the therapist can then help the child connect to themselves. And that's really the task at hand, because remember, escalation means the child has disconnected from themselves. Now, let's say one more piece here. That doesn't mean that in this process, the therapist can't set a boundary. That may absolutely need to be what happens. But there's a way of setting the boundary that allows for that connection to continue and doesn't just shut the child down, which can also then lead to further escalation, because then the child wants you to know what it feels like to then be overpowered. So, what can that look like? Acknowledging and redirecting. Acknowledging the intensity, acknowledging the need, and then redirecting, which is different than no, stop, you can't, not allowed. So there are other reasons why a child might be escalating, but those are a couple ones that I think are really important for us to continue to keep on our radar so that we don't just go into labeling or judging the behavior as bad, or labeling this kid as, oh my gosh, this kid just escalates and he was or she was trying to get me, or whatever it is. No, the child's disconnected. They're not feeling safe. They want you to know what it feels like to be them. And there's likely some level of incongruence happening somewhere in the environment. So, how can we hold all those variables as we're then creative the child to try to come back to themselves so they can begin to govern themselves?